brand new to the meeting, just so you guys know, I am Scotty Lucas. I'm the president of the club.
I'm Jan, and I'm the treasurer.
Hello, I'm Paneet, and I am the vice president of ASME.
I'm Keshpal, and I am secretary at ASME.
And Mr. Ward, if you'd care to introduce yourself.
I think you're muted.
I think you're muted.
I was trying to spare you my chewing my lunch down. So my name is Jonathan Ward. I'm an industrial designer and the founder of an automotive brand called Icon. And my son is a proud participant. He's a freshman, just started this year, Quinn.
All right. So just to give you guys all just a general overview about Icon, the automotive brand that Mr. Ward started. We're just going to start out with a little video. That is usually, it's pretty good. Here, let me share my screen, share sound. Okay. All right. So I think now we'll turn it over to Mr. Ward. And just again, we want to say thank you, Mr. Ward, for coming to speak with us. It's such an awesome opportunity that you were able to come and give us this talk and show us around and all this sort of stuff.
Of course. No, I'm happy to. I love doing stuff like this. I love the program. And I've kind of had a non-traditional path, right, in what I've done. So I've learned the hard way and the easy way, whatever, the kind of fun way, that is a unique path. So anything that I can share about non-traditional paths of like, get your degree, comply, fit into the silo and the big corporate structure, keep your head down, play the game. That's good for some people versus branching out, starting your own venture, you know, being more open-minded about engaging both analog, traditional engineering solutions with CAD and modern resources. A lot of times can create something that's elevated, you know, it's more soulful. So I'm happy to share and to blab a little bit. We just figured, by the way, guys, and girls, I assume, we wanted to start with that video in case for those of you that didn't know what the brand is and what we're all about. It seemed to be a bit more eloquent than I am. So hopefully that sort of laid the groundwork. And I'm here at our factory in Southern Cal in Chatsworth. So I'll be taking you guys through the shop and showing you around a little bit as well.
Yeah, and if you have any questions, by the way, feel free to shoot them into the chat, and we'll be watching that. And yeah, we'll make sure those get answered.
Or also, I mean, during the tour, Mr. Ward.
Oh yeah.
If I remember, you said that if we have any questions during the tour, just shout them out. Lay them all out on the table.
Totally. And like, for example, there's so much going on in the shop that I might just rip right by something that's interesting. So tell me to hit the brakes and we can do a deep dive into all the projects. So the shop is basically, we're about 100,000 square feet. We have dedicated departments that address different production lines and models. So for example, we're probably mostly known for our FJ series that we do in 4 body styles based on the vintage Toyota Land Cruisers, and our version of the first generation Broncos, and our version of the 47 to 53 Chevy pickup. But then we also do all sorts of freaky one-off things, which you'll see like very greatly, but like that 59 Mercedes, this 1935 Auburn, are both waiting their turn to be kind of reimagined as a modern daily driver. But yeah, there's all sorts of craziness going on in here, and vintage inspiration abound. This is our showroom, which is pretty much without anything to show because we really don't have any inventory. The vast majority of everything we do is built to order for specific clients. So this is what we nickname in short the TR, or the Thrift Master. So 47 to 53 base Chevrolet design. They're killer. They just were a farm truck, so they drive like a farm truck. So we seek to evolve and update that from the ground up. So proprietary Icon Brembo 6-piston sport brakes, T4041 two-piece AT hardware, independent front. We redesign and evolve the style, that you can never even paint very well. Stock taillights were kind of cheesy, so we redesigned and machined those. Absolute money pit. Tailgates, used to have chains here. So now we've designed them with us that has stainless cables to bear club haze for the down action. And then for sport, LS3 with full emissions, power windows, door locks, all sorts of like hidden tech. So like Ash, has a little DAV and CarPlay and all that good stuff. Windows, the original one would have been plastic. For up, or you double tap it, which took a mind-numbing amount of hours of programming, and then they all go up or down from that one side. And it's just like billions of little, really what we're known about. Obsessing of the original design. So like this front badge is based on the GM original badge, as of were those side badges I showed you, but they're elevated in the materials used, but like the typeface and stuff is still referencing the original 1940s language.
We have
blah,
a
blah, blah.
question.
Here's another one we're doing.
We
Bring it
have
on.
we have a question in the chat. It says, do you typically use Connect and Cruise drivetrains offered from GM for your projects? Oh. I don't think we can.
Yeah,
hear
good question. I use Rod, which is part of the Connect Cruise. I don't like their transmission controller. So I have more control to program. Did I lose you guys? Can you hear me now?
Did for a second there. I think the connection is
sorry.
just kind of coming in and out.
So yes, we use the Connect and Cruise, specifically the emissions certified eRod.
Okay.
Although I don't like their transmission controller. So we run our own tranny controller, which gives us just a lot more control over the parameters. So this one's kind of nifty. We do this whole series of vehicles, these one-offs we call derelicts or reformers. So the idea is they kind of look beat, somewhat abandoned at first glance, which they kind of were. But then we'll do modern chassis, like that one's running a 6.1 SRT8 Hemi Fuelie with a 5-speed, 4-wheel disc brakes, rack and pinion. This 70 Benz 109, W109 is running intercooled chassis. Did a lot of analysis, and we just motor way far back and as low as possible to get the handling parameters that we wanted. And it's kind of torn down, so it's hard to see, but we're doing a gazillion modifications, including a hand-built ladder frame, because these were unibody. but we're keeping the floorboard structure, rear floor, many tubs, even the full trunk line is all new fabrication.
So
And then
how do
we'll
you,
do-
quick question.
Yeah.
How do you fit the ladder body in there when it's you already got the whole unit body there? How do you make room
Well,
for
that was part of the reasons that we modified the floors was to create these outboard box areas, which allowed us to then make room for the chassis, and bent hardway stuffed up high. I don't know if we can get a good, can you see it? Can you
Yeah,
see it?
yeah, you can see. Yeah,
So
there you
it's super stuffed up there. But you know, that's a good example of a simple decision, or what's, I guess, not that simple, but a quick decision that was needed for the performance that realized absolute time-sucking disaster in labor hours. So I mean, even the training that we want to run requires a much larger trans tunnel. The engine position meant we wanted to build a complete new firewall. All the plumbing for the modern HVAC orientation is different. Even the seats, we had to move them closer together because of where we hid the rails, which in turn meant the armrests hit each other, which in turn meant we needed to reverse engineer those. This is like round 20 something, you know, 3D print for fit confirmation.
Mhm.
And then like the original shifters, we'll do that. We'll CAD model it to appear stock, keep the original apparatus so the human interface still stays vintage feeling, and then work to refine that again and again and again. And the finished article after the fit confirmation pieces will be CNC'd and polished stainless with offset LED for indicating what gear you're in and all that fun stuff. And it just goes on and on and on, but they're probably my favorite projects. You know, like those wheels, you know, you can't fit 6-piston Brembos behind a stock 15-inch wheel. So we laser scan the original hubcap and then design these wheels to comply with our braking package. Then we will use all sorts of tricks to patina paint and weather that. And then the center cap and the wheels, like the classic Mercedes Star, which is kind of fun.
We've got another question. What ECU do you use in the Hemi that's in the 54 DeSoto?
So I run the Mopar factory ones, but I find Mopar really sucks at support. So I generally will send those out and we will hack them and reset all the parameters specific to the application that we're fitting the powertrain in. GM is by far, and I get some crap for always or most commonly using GM powertrains, but they have the most responsive and intelligent support network within GM for their performance products. And the aftermarket community is so robust for them. It's, for the most part, the best way to go. And there's exceptions, though, like this crazy project. This is in the mock fit stage. So this is an old C20 Chevy pickup, but it's actually a 2020 Chevy four-wheel drive pickup that we've rebodied with its grandfather's body. It's still in the mock-up phase. So we're figuring out how to get everything to work. So this being a full production line OEM application means it's CAN bus, which is a whole new can of worms, literally. Pun was not intended, but maybe whoever named it CAN meant to intend that pun. But as you can see, we have umpteen modules and computers everywhere. And right now we're struggling with making sure we understand the network at a very deep level and are able to maintain all the cool things that make using the modern network so interesting, you know, from hill hold and cylinder deactivation, all that stuff. It's the next level of drivability for the end user, and something our industry, and you know, at least my level of the industry, is sort of hot rod aftermarket mod guys, been very slow to jump into. Any more questions, or should I explain another project?
I'll ask another question. For that one
Go.
that you took the old body from the Chevy pickup and
Yes.
you put it onto a brand new truck, what did you do with the old or no, the new body of the new truck and the old like under stuff of the old truck?
So the original running gear and chassis from the vintage C20 was put back out to support people doing stock restorations in the larger community, which is a fancy jumble of words to say I put it up on Craigslist and got a little bit of money back for my client. The new Chevy truck body, as well as this Hellcat you see out here in the lot, I've learned from experience, hold on to them until everything is done, the car goes. Because you'd be manufactured new from the dealer, because there's such a rare, weird part people aren't seeing service needs for them. So we kind of just keep that in a pile in the lot until we're 100% done with the project.
Yeah, it makes sense. Totally.
The other project that's got a lot of interesting engineering details, design and engineering going into it, is this 75 Cherokee. So, they did the Wagoneer, which everyone knows, but the Cherokee is like a two-door wagon version. But we kind of played revisionist history with it. So the earlier Jeep products, when Jeep was owned by Kaiser, had this unique front end, which people call the shovel nose or the Rhino or whatever, but has this cool vertical jut grille and nice details. But still, like, the execution quality is kind of cheesy because it was all about mass production. So like, we laser scan these original, totally useless. They were solid. I don't even know why they're there. And maybe for some global market, they had to have additional lighting or some optional fog light they actually never bothered to design. So we had some fun with those and machined those. And powertrain, and that one's running the current version, the 392 Hemi. And the, again, Mopar for the primary are
Mr. Ward, we're losing
our
you a bit.
design. Yeah, I don't know what's up with the reception. Is that any better?
Maybe
Let's
if
stick
we,
to this side.
yeah, okay. I don't know. Tej Paul said to turn off videos, and sort of it started to work better. But maybe we should turn off. I'll turn off my video for the thing. Just it might help. All right, you can continue now.
I'm on full bars and full coverage on my end.
Oh, okay, okay.
You guys seeing all this?
Yes, it's getting there. It's a
You
little.
got me?
Yes, we got you.
All right, cool.
Mhm.
So we bought an older version. The truck's a 75. We bought a 66 pickup, stole the front clip, which also had the cooler fenders with the fender flares, and on the bed, which will graft into here. And we deleted the fuel fill door and spent, oh gosh, probably 110, 120 hours designing this. So then now the fuel door hides back here, so you don't have that unnecessary kind of wart here on the side of the body. And then we took all the original plastic interior bits and redesigned and elevated them. Obviously they never had in-dash AC, so we took design inspiration from the grill, and then which we're also CNCing, but then designed these. Same with all the knobs and switches with function indication. We designed the brake pull, transfer case levers. Some of these are still 3D print fit checks. And I'll just embrace the humor that Instagram was quick to advise me of what that resembles. Is what it is, works well. That'll get embedded into the leather become the center phallic console of sorts. Is the reception still holding up, guys?
Mr.
Yes.
Ward, on putting a 392 Hemi into something like that, do you have issues with the Hemi and the ECU looking for some of the sensors, or are you able to move over the sensors and all that sort of thing?
Well, there's two ways that that's traditionally done. Well, there's many, but two that we like. One is buy an entire brand new vehicle and take the entire network and move it over. So the vehicle, the network, is not aware that it is no longer in its native platform. That is extremely expensive and complex to do, especially with current generation electronics. So more often, we're more apt to take the powertrain with a harness designed to function in a standalone manner that really at that point is, needs IAC, needs vehicle speed signal input, and pretty minor peripheral inputs. The problem with that is usually they're kind of dumbed down by the OEM, by Ford, Mopar, Chevy, all of them. So a lot of times we end up adding more things back into the network and creating our own because again, like that end goal is the drivability refinement. The other thing is the chassis. Like if you were to shove that Hemi into the original overcooked spaghetti riveted C-channel chassis that came on these trucks, you just have a squirrely death trap. Like you have no drivability dynamics whatsoever. But this is 240 wall mandrel bent 2x6 chassis, and then we work with Fox Racing and Eibach, and we use Johnny joints a lot instead of Heims. But now it's coilover suspension all the way around, 12 inches of travel, dual rate adjustability for rebound, nitrogen charge, and that's a big part of what we do. And most people don't do that because it's a hell of a lot more work.
I have a quick question on the kind of like welding processes you guys use. So I'm seeing a few welds on the bottom of the frame there, or of the chassis. Are you guys using TIG for that, or?
So it depends on which detail and what material we're running. We're in-house. We've got probably 15 MIGs and 4 TIGs. We're Miller fans, so most of my stuff is Miller. But if it's like finish visual eye candy stuff, I'll be more inclined to TIG it just because I'm a geek and I love the look of a TIG. But like on the chassis, they get powder coated anyways. So these are all MIG, but not robotic. And we don't grind smooth. We just pretty anal about a pretty weld. So all the beads have a nice flow to them.
Yeah.
And I'd really like to get into plasma welding. I just think it's so sexy, but it's just not viable in my little world.
Have
That's
you
one
ever
of our-
considered spray welding, like spray MIG?
Yeah, I have. The only thing I've seen very interesting for that is like restoring vintage panels, right? That have significant corrosion and you want to infill areas. I find that to be pretty interesting approach for that. The other thing I've been trying, it's very hard to change the culture in the shop. And I mean, I'm 50, but I'm not ancient. And most of my guys are my age down into their 20s. Trying to get people to really embrace some of these new super sexy, mostly 3M epoxies. The science and the evolution, the capability of some of these 3M weld adhesives is incredible. And they work so well and quicker on production times. And they have the heat tolerance to pretty much manage powder coat ovens or anything, we're going to throw at them. So I think that's like the industry's slow to learn and embrace, but that's definitely a big trend I see coming.
So that adhesive, you don't have to weld at all. You just basically apply it. You mix it and then you apply it.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
pretty incredible. And like we had the 3M rep come down here. I called him and said, look, I don't think my team gets it. I had learned about it in a course, but had him come down and we did like shear pull tests and a whole bunch of different tests. And literally the metal would tear before the bonded area would give up.
So it's
So
a metal to metal bond?
Yeah, so you use this epoxy, and some of them are 1 part, some are 2 parts, some are UV excited, some are temperature excited, some are just time kickoff. But yeah, non-coated surfaces ideally. So you also often still want to get good mechanical tooth, but they're incredibly impressive, like stupid good.
You haven't started using those yet, have you?
We just have, yeah, in the last year or so. But again, I see my guys reaching for the torch. I'm like, well, wait a minute, stop, back up, think it through. Why aren't we bonding that instead? And if you look to the big car companies, you know, the vast majority of the primary vehicular structures are all bonded now.
Wow.
And you can bond dissimilar materials and not have the anodic liability because of the bonding agent as well.
Is it like economically viable compared to welding?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. The material costs, I mean, it's not cheap, but it's not crazy, and you're not using that much.
Okay.
And the other thing too, like paint sucks. In our industry is just everyone keeps painting. It's an environmental disaster. Then also in California, that means the materials are all waterborne now, which means they're not even that good to begin with. So when we can, like, you know, our FJ bodies, once we CAD and engineered them and had the models all locked down, I actually have a military supplier up just over the border in Canada, and his main business is making pontoon boats. So he makes my bodies, and these are done quite crudely with just fixtures, rollers, and benders. There's no stamping involved, but they're 5/32 unannealed 5052 H32, which then means I can lean into powder coating those bodies. So I worked with Cardinal Coatings, which is here in LA. They're one of the oldest wet coat companies and big powder coat line. And we developed this Teflon polyester hybrid SDIC powder coat. So not only does that make my production quicker, reduces my costs, alleviates the drama of having to deal with the body shops, which is a constant pain, but the surface is way more durable. Even like here's, you know, our Broncos are still traditionally painted, but even these, the entire body structure gets a zinc suspension epoxy-based powder coat in lieu of traditional primer, then 3M seam seal, then heat cured polyurea for the underside and inside floor, and then your finish paint. And that's just a lot more steps to go through to get a Class A finish, but here a bunch of engineers will geek on those. Aren't those sexy little connectors? Oh yeah.
I got a question. On when you get the guy that makes the pontoon boats to make some of the bodies, does anybody, I don't know, maybe at Icon or something, do you have an engineer that does like stress analysis on those or anything like that?
Yeah, and with all the finite analysis capabilities of most of the software these days, we get a really good advanced feel for that. For example, originally, I really thought it'd be sexy to do the bodies in stainless.
Mm-hmm.
And stainless steel has dropped in price in the last 5 years. But the reality is stainless and brittles, and it's actually a pretty crappy idea for bodies because you're going to get stress fractures and cracks, especially with a four-wheel drive. So we went back to good old aluminum. So then we just, from our own intellect and by consulting with other experts more knowledgeable than us, we determined which grade we wanted to work with that was still compliant with the skill set of the supplier, determine what thickness was viable, and then, well, in the case of the FJ body, we quadrupled it just because why not? Make it stronger, make it last longer. It's already a 2-ton boat, so the weight factor, you know, really wasn't a concern.
Do you do the same thing with like custom chassis or chassis rebuilds?
Yeah, the good thing with the custom chassis is, although the profiles are obviously unique every time, which will involve, you know, scanning the underside of the vintage vehicle's body to determine what we're going to run. But we know in general the rail size and sidewalls that we have great experience with, and then the general layout architecture of like the A-arms and spindles and stuff like that. We're pretty much using the same one. So like one will use a dropped spindle index versus the other will have a standard height index or different variations. But in that case, we are able to fortunately amortize a lot of that engineering and repeat it over different platforms again and again. Uh-oh, did I lose you guys again?
No. You're all good. Just looks awesome.
Shop's pretty quiet right now. Most of my guys are at lunch, which is, this timing worked out well, because otherwise it's a holy racket of impact wrenches and grinders and stuff. This is our supporting building. So all the parts inventory, all the JIT stuff. We've got a VF4 super speed Haas with the turret, because how can you buy one of these and not get the cool turret? Just watching that thing dance through the tooling is so much fun. Pretty low spec on laser. I have, but do not endorse this company. They suck. Full spectrum laser. It's a 90 watt. It's quite capable and versatile, but incredibly unreliable, unfortunately. Procurement teams over here. My electrical engineer is up in the front suite next to my office, and then my mechanical engineer, we've learned to absolutely hide because everyone's always bugging him. And cut me off if reception gets bad in this building and I'll swing back to the other one. But yeah, we hide him up in a little sort of aircraft control tower hidden space in the very far end of the shop. And then we've learned we had to create paper processes. Otherwise, everyone's always going to the engineer to figure out some conundrum. But as you guys can look forward to, pretty much the highest paid person on our staff. We have to be careful with how his time is spent and who can improve him to dive into one project or another.
I have a question. So you have all those parts there. Do you keep much? I remember you were saying at the very beginning, since most things are custom one-offs, you don't keep much inventory. But what kind of inventory is here that you do keep?
So when we've learned, because square footage is so darn expensive, to stop hoarding all the used parts and vintage stuff we take off. So we liquidate those very quickly. So nowadays, my inventory, I don't think just in time or JIT it makes any sense in a COVID world where supply chains can get interrupted very quickly. And even when they get turned back on, then the shipping network logistics are so overburdened that you really have a problem. So for the most part, like, I rarely import. Almost all my stuff is made in America. The proprietary stuff, the intellectual property that we've developed, everything from our gas tanks to our dashes to our bumper carrier assemblies to soft top frames and laser cut sheet metal interior pieces and bits down to billions and billions of little hidden widgets and brackets. Those I have made by regional aerospace companies because they're in somewhat of a depressed market and they're comfortable with low volume. And let's face it, I mean, this is even the machine that does these nutserts is sexier than the little handheld one that we have. So they can knock out this part, and I may have to put 40 on the shelf at a time. But that was key when I looked at how I'd envision this brand, because up until we started tweaking and doing this, it was always one-off every single time. So your quality control, your consistency is totally random. But this way, it's cheaper for me. I mean, that bracket I showed you probably cost me 22 bucks a piece if I order 50 at a time. I could barely pick up the sheet metal and the nutserts for that much money, making them in-house. So it made good sense to go that route. So we pretty much focus on stocking levels for the production models, and then the one-off vehicles, we just don't even go there. We do an outline for the client, we do the engineering review, we do the anticipated procurement list, then we go buy all that stuff for our client. And it's just silly to stock it after a while. You just end up with so much stuff. And again, the carrying cost, the square footage, it's just something people don't think about.
Just a quick question. So do you what is the average time or I guess the production rate for you guys?
Yeah, that's a good one. So in the crazier side of things, the one-offs, they average about 22 to 2,600 man hours, internal man hours, per project. And then that project, including, sublets and non-employee based labor, you can definitely add a couple thousand hours to that. So generally a one-off vehicle for a client from the moment we start until we are done, those are generally going to take about 12 to 16 months to complete. The production models are a little bit smarter of a business because there's a lot more standardization, therefore scalability of those. So the production vehicles take us about 600 hours to do. And from start to finish, we can generally knock that out in 3 to 4 months. And then there's the back order and wait times for all of those, which is a whole nother conversation. But yeah. And again, it's like that balance that the video was stating between passion and production. There's a lot of reasons that I should be focused just on production, but the company has a soul and is driven by my passion, and I find it imperative to make sure I'm still excited to come to work and start the next project. And if I was just focusing on repeating widgets, I wouldn't be, so it's a delicate balance.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense.
So I had a question about your electrical engineer. Does he just help you guys out with the wiring, or is there also engine optimizations or other optimizations you guys do with the electrical?
Good. I'll turn around to you guys. Uh-oh, doesn't sound like it. I didn't hear a reply.
Yeah, we just got you back.
Yeah, just got you back.
Okay. All right, if it's jumpy, I'll go back inside, but there's neat eye candy out here as well. So yeah, mostly, the production models, we mapped out, tested, engineered, and refined, and then locked down the files for the wiring harnesses for the production models. Then those in turn are made by regional aerospace companies so that, it's silly to we pick all our favorite, all that stuff, then he'll handle job. We also get into some Arduino and stuff like that double tap power window gizmo. No one in the industry really cared enough to come up with it. And I brought friends in the industry the idea. I'm like, dude, if you make it, I'll buy it. And they're like, they're too lazy. So then we'll take on projects like that to try and, again, focus on elevating our finished project, even if that means we have to hemorrhage hours and engineer it ourselves.
I've got another question in the chat. It's so for people that are interested in cars and automotive, but haven't been involved or anything, really don't know anything about cars, how would you recommend them get acquainted with basically car anatomy and stuff like that?
Buy something from the 60s or 70s that's complete but needs some love, and jump in, talk someone out of a garage space at home, and just jump in with both feet and just get creative. That's what I did. I have no proper degrees, no specific. I mean, I've done a lot of training over the years, but when I jumped in, it was just because I had an idea and an opinion and an interest and a passion, and I just learned and kept sucking it up and learning. And then obviously past a point, once I had a fairly successful, viable brand, it was all about realizing I'm not good at many things, really understanding and literally pen to paper, what do I suck at? What am I decent at? Focusing on that and then building out a team of other people with other skill sets that then like together we're elevated, right? We can do so much more as a team. As long as like the original focus is clearly defined for the brand before building a team. Otherwise, you have an octopus who tears himself in 8 directions, you know?
Yeah. So when so you mentioned you have other team members in that are experts in other areas, right? So you got your mechanical, you got your electrical. What other kinds, like for your fabricators, like what kinds of areas, like are they specifically geared towards like a certain part of fabrication, like say metal fabrication, like specifically with in regards to metal forming or welding? Is that how you hire people typically, like looking at those kinds of skills?
Yeah, but at the end of the day, like especially a lot of these tech schools, I've just found are just nonsense. Like these graduates will show up with like they've watched way too many car building reality shows and they're like, I can build anything. And within like 2 or 3 weeks, like their workmates will show them to the door because they don't know anything other than they have a debt from a tech school that left them with the impression that they're going to make 200 grand a year by being a lead tech at a BMW dealership, you know? So I've really, some of my best hires were actually here on film productions in crew that then were like, wait a minute, I actually hate my job and it's unreliable and unstable. But for 20 years, every night and weekend I've been restoring my own cars or my mom or my sister or myself. And eye contact and a handshake and having organically learned the skills, I put a lot of value in that as well. And then to answer you as far as channels, so like the repeatable models are all built by dedicated teams. So there's a BR team and that's all they do or build the Broncos. There is welding required and stuff. So a minimum of 3 people out of each team will be certified welders. But the heavier fab is specifically in that one-off division where we do the derelicts and reformers. And that we always try and, other than the ME, the EE, and myself and the project manager, we try and give ownership. So 2 technicians are responsible for, you know, for example, that Mercedes from the day the original car rolls in until the finished project rolls out the door, which I think is really valuable mentally for everyone to like feel more ownership, more involvement in the project. But you know, there's always a case where one guy can stack dimes with the TIG way better than anybody else, and it's enough of like a team structure where there's no ego. Well, hopefully not. There always is. To say, hey, Armin, dude, would you come over and throw down a bead for me on this critical part? So it's a little bit of give and take, but the heavier fab skills rest within the one-off team. And like I want to do everything in-house, but I'm realizing as a business that's really not sensible past the point. And for the highest elevated extents of a given craft, you kind of want someone who does just that and only that every day, all day. And we're low enough volume of a company, you know, we produce maybe 30 vehicles a year, that I don't really have like workstations where a guy just does one thing. So if we're getting into massive, extensive custom metal work, I'll go to Stone's Fabrication, Brian Stone, and I'll just kick it to him because he understands my standards and the brand and everything. And we can just kick it off to him while my technicians that would have been doing that, He arguably is going to do it quicker and better, not cheaper, but my technicians could be redeployed on something else that's a closer match to their skill set, and it means our volume is slightly enabled.
That's great. So that makes me think more of, instead, I was imagining a little more like fabrication stuff, but it seems more like the two guys that take over, well, essentially are in charge of taking that car from A to Z. They kind of just find where to source the parts from, right? Rather than just entirely fabricating them.
No, not really. Like, especially the one-offs. I mean, I'll go back and we can walk through that Mercedes very specifically in this context. So I'll design it. I'll produce the renderings, some loosey-goosey South Park quality CAD just for ideation. Like, I mean, here's some renders and stuff that we've done for various active projects. So as we work through ideation with the client, different ways we can go, different ways we can redesign, working through color palette, working through textiles, graphics, and the like. But then we'll write a master document for that project. Then we'll meet with the project manager, the engineers, and the technicians. Then we'll pick which team has the most appropriate skill set to build it. They'll drive or push or pull in the old vehicle the gazillion aspects of the fab. So for example, really the only principal fabrication effort on this too that were subletted was the new floor, mini tubs, trunk, and custom inner fenders, which went to that expert because it's just more effective. And the chassis, we do the engineering in-house, then Art Morrison Enterprises does all my chassis manufacture. My engineer will get with his engineers. They'll do one last analyzation of it and sign off and then kick it out. But then like my guys are fabricating the seat mounts, the column, the HVAC fitment, the parking brake would have been on a lever under dash. Now we're going to do a pull-up style so you can be a little drift goober if you want. The shifter redesign and the forensic disassembly of the original shifter to get the components ready to integrate for the prototype and the final. That's part of that fab team directly. You know, this car originally had vacuum actuated windows and door locks, which are a nightmare. So the fab team, again, from previous experience knows, okay, we really like this push-pull solenoid, we like this scissor assembly, etc. And then they'll do the integration related fabrication for that. So it takes a village.
Yeah, so it's kind of a little bit of everything then.
Yeah. So like the guy who's the leader on this job, you know, these are the original speaker grills that sit on the back of the deck lid. Well, we're putting in Focal K2 with separates. So like we want some serious modern audio, and then we'll do multiple 8s hiding in the trunk. But he's like, well, if we redo these, we're going to lose a lot of the acoustic range. And as a company, we kind of hate plastics. We're like, why don't we just, you know, he came to us in a morning meeting and said, well, what if we took this general shape and design language, reinterpreted it to be compliant with our modern speaker, and then we machine it and powder coat it. So, you know, there's so many layers of the collaboration, you know, and even like the dash, our modern HVAC controls are these micro switches, but then they're not compliant with the original illustration. So then I just knocked out a vector file and had a local aircraft company make that in aluminum. And then we just took a mic to the original knobs, and then those original knobs will have machined, and then we'll powder coat them, and on and on and on and on. But like once you get a group buy-in on the goals of a project, then everyone starts geeking out on those little details. And as far as the client's financial tolerance will allow, then we get into executing all that stuff. Like here's a good example, the original Becker radio from that Mercedes. Well, we're running digital sound processor amplified Bluetooth dependent audio. So what we're going to do now is take apart this original head unit. We're going to make some of these memory function setters for the radio be the reset Bluetooth excite, and then we're going to run a contemporary dual pop potentiometer for volume and bass. And then we'll take the original knobs, reinterpret those, make them fit the shanks for the modern switches. But the end goal is now it's an LED backlit AM/FM band radio that looks dead stock, but gives the client still that authentic, visceral interface, right? But it's all direct to your phone or whatever Bluetooth source you want. So you get that modern functionality with the vintage tactile and a little bit of like, I mean, it's not a good James Bond or reinterpreting that vintage found objects into having the modern functions that you're going to need.
So I'll ask one more question and then see if anybody else wants to go. But so how do you keep track of all those parts? Because I mean, you're literally in every single component of the car there is. How do you keep track of that? Because I'd imagine that's thousands of components per vehicle.
Yeah, it's a complete train wreck. So we used to use off the shelf like automotive repair shop or dealership management software, which we got away with for a number of years. But then there came a point where like this is just not working well. So we ended up using good old FileMaker and having a really robust software designed specifically for our process. So we can track the clients, the suppliers, the sub-assemblies, etc. But one thing that it does not do, and all ye young potential engineers, I should forewarn you, biggest problem I've had with engineers is organization. And I'm the same way, like when I'm in a CAD file, like the building could be burning down and I won't even realize it. I'll be all about my 3D connection mouse and I'll be in the model in my brain. But the problem is over time, understanding which is the most current file, which was revised or was failed to have been revised, what assembly it goes with and all of that is a disaster. I mean, we have a project, we went through a series of engineers trying to find the right guy, and I had 3 senior engineers on a huge project that I've invested 7 digits in. Now, my new engineer, trying to look back and understand all of those files from previous engineers, I worry it's a disaster. We're literally going to have to take the first article, the first mule vehicle, forensically disassemble it, and scan it and mic it and check every aspect of every file, which is so stupid. So organization's systems for files is just so critical and so often overlooked. But like at least our part numbering inventory system, like the Icon rear bumpers comprised of 31 different parts from 3 different suppliers. But at least the inventory that counts how many of those I have in stock, the back end is automated so that when we go to reorder it, it knows the quantities and will pre-populate the separate purchase orders to those different vendors to make sure we're not missing an aspect of a given assembly.
Okay. I think we'll just, if anybody has any last questions, you guys can ask them, but otherwise, you know, we'll start wrapping it up here. So does anybody have any last questions to ask Mr. Ward.
Yeah, Mr. Ward, over the years seeing you on Hoonigan and Jalen's Garage, I've always wondered what's the significance behind the blue-bellied California lizard? Does that have a special meaning to you?
You know, it's funny. Like, we ended up making up a story because we get asked so often, but it's total BS. Which was like, you know, when you're out on a trail in the middle of nowhere and no other vehicle could make it to where you are, and it's just you and your icon, then you're going to see those lizards everywhere. And their spirit of being so adaptive in so many different environments and thriving. But that's totally made up Disneyland poetry. So the real story may not be as interesting, but back when I was still trying to call this a hobby, and I was hauling some old beat up FJ40 out of some guy's garage in Reseda, it was part of a cleanup of the property, and out on the curb waiting for the recycler was a vintage fireplace screen, and attached to the screen was, I believe, a butterfly and this lizard, and it caught my eye. And I'm like, he's like, yeah, it's junk. It's gone to the dump. If you want it, take it. So I took my 10 snips and cut it off, took it home, JB Blaster, let it sit. Screws still loosened up, and I pulled him off. And then he was run on all of my personal vehicles for decades. Just sort of my thing, like whatever my daily driver was, I'd pull him off the last car and put him on the next car and keep rolling them around. And it's funny because people keep sending me like, there's a fraction of all the weird lizard thingies that we've ended up with over the years. In fact, back to welds, talk about being able to throw a bead.
Wow. Ha, that's crazy.
Isn't that nuts?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this brown dog welding, this guy named Josh Welton, who's just like stupid, talented, wonderful guy, disabled guy. But yeah, so that's the real story behind the lizard. And then it's like with my marketeer hat on, iconography is so important in branding that it always knew I had to have a graphical representation of the brand. So it just fell into place organically that it became the lizard. That's one other thing, by the way, speaking of like design and marketing and stuff like that. Any of you guys that are entering the engineering program, I think both engineering and to much deeper extent design schools focus on creating people that all kind of see and think and work the same way. I think that is a huge mistake. So bit of advice that I would have is like, if you already have a novel way of seeing an assembly or the world or a concept for a better product or function, honor that. Don't let it get like whitewashed out of you, because designers with a natural perspective or engineers with a natural opinion or perspective have such greater opportunities in life and in their career path, I think, than compliant robots that'll, you know, conform and sit in the cubicle and knock out the widgets for the man. Like, now more than ever, all you students have a bigger opportunity to follow your own dream and create your own brand and have more control over your own destiny than any generation before you, right? Both with COVID and direct to retail models working, to people understanding and being open to disruptive startups and independence, because they're starting to realize a lot of the big established industries aren't really so concerned about making the product the best it can be. They may be more about making it as cheap as possible to fall apart a day after the warranty cycle. And there's just so many opportunities for you guys to have more control in your own future of how you execute your engineering skills and education. And if you at all have a sense of design, then you're really dangerous, because an ME of any sort who has a sense, an opinion, a perspective for design language, and it's so rare, that's so valuable. So if you got it, don't let anyone take it from you, honor it.
Awesome. Anybody else? Okay, then. If anybody, if you oh, yes.
Oh, uh, Mr. Ward, I liked how you spoke about design engineering, and it's such a small. It seems like a small field because of how manufacturing and automation has dominated the market. I mean, as someone who's interested in design, what do you recommend when you're starting out?
I think a passion project, you know, something a problem you've identified or a solution that you visualized. I think running through that and then using that as your entree into that segment of the market, because that proves you're a thinker. You're not just an executions guy, but you thought of an issue, you identified a path to a solution, you prototyped, you executed however far you got. I think that's really a really good kind of like visceral and honest way to do that. And be that to then friends and family having to come up with the raise to bootstrap it and do it yourself or kickstart it, or to go work with a company that has an open-minded enough of a structure to not get in their own way and to embrace you, Anthony. You know what I mean? Like to see value in someone pushing back or asking questions or seeking to evolve a product or a design. Did I get
Thank
your
you very
name right?
much.
That was Anthony, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that was it. Thank you. I just want to like to thank you everybody for coming to the meeting. And then again, especially thank you to Mr. Ward for having or for being available to speak and show us around his shop and just share the knowledge and everything. So with that, I think we'll close up the meeting.